The book of Revelation says, "The spirit of prophecy is the testimony of Jesus Christ." This is at the very heart of FirstAmendmentRadio.com. In that spirit, we have created the Prophecy Reality News app for all of your mobile devices, streaming First Amendment Radio 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. Available for your Apple, Android device, and smartphone, absolutely free. Get the Prophecy Reality News app installed today, so you can listen to First Amendment Radio wherever you are. The Prophecy Reality News app. Get it now.
Okay, welcome back to the Investigative Journal on this March 23rd, 2015 day on our calendar. I'm your host, Greg Anthony, and you're listening to FirstAmendmentRadio.com. You can catch my show every evening from 6 p.m. to 7 p.m. That's live on FirstAmendmentRadio.com, Monday through Friday. It's also replayed on my website, ArcticBeacon.com, and you can get many of my old shows, as well as many replays on Liberty Radio Live and several AM stations across the South, and on shortwave, where there are selected stories and articles and shows put up. Thank you. So, it's no secret that I've been looking deeply into the Tony Alamo story and showing you that the persecution of this man, who's now spending 175 years in jail for being convicted of charges called the Mann Act, are something that has been calculated by those who follow the Vatican and those who don't look deep enough into really what's going on behind the scenes. And I said a long time ago, if Tony Alamo never brought up the Vatican in his gospel messages and showed how the reformers showed back in the time of the Reformation, how the Vatican was actually pointed out as the Antichrist in the Bible, if he wouldn't have done this and wouldn't have sent out millions of pamphlets all over the world trying to alert people of this fact, none of this would have ever happened. So what I've done is, I'm also working on a screenplay, which is also a theater play regarding this man. It starts out with him in a jail cell and moves from that point, and showing some of the tragedies that have existed in this ministry regarding his outspokenness and the ministry's outspokenness to get this word across to people. And through that, I've kind of divided it into a three-part series, which is basically one, the persecutions of him in this ministry over a period of 40 years. Then what happened to the children of the Alamo Ministry and the parents, and then also how the third approach is to take away all of their property. And in the end, what it shows is there's really no freedom of speech or freedom of religion in this country if you cross that Vatican line. And so today I wanted to do two things, and I wanted to go back and look at a little bit about Tony, as well as feature the raid of 2008, the final raid of 2008 that put him behind bars. Now, this wasn't the first time they had tried to frame him, and when I say use the word frame, I mean it, because if you see over the years all the things that have been done, you will see that it's an orchestrated effort by law enforcement to shut this ministry down. And what it really tells you, it sends out a two-pronged message. One, don't criticize the Vatican, and two, play the ecumenical game, which means you can say anything you want, you can read your Bibles, but don't talk about the truth. Either historical truth about the Vatican or what they're actually doing today. Now, he had been fighting, and when I say fighting, he had been outspoken critic of the Vatican, and I say the Jesuit-led New World Order, for more than 3 or 4 decades, since he started his ministry back on the streets of Hollywood back in the late 60s and 70s, after he became a born-again Christian. And from the outset, this was a man that was sincere in his approach towards looking at the Vatican truthfully, and yet trying at the same time to create a Bible-believing ministry that would help people get off drugs, create an environment that was free from drugs or free from a lot of the evils you see today going on in the world. And he created an atmosphere where all the people that I talked to in his ministry said that they were, you're always going to have people that are going to be discontent when you open your doors. Imagine if you open the doors to your house, what would happen? You would have all kinds of people, and there would be all kinds of problems. And to deal with that, there has to be a definite, strong faith and a commitment. Now, he was also a good businessman, so his ministry grew by leaps and bounds. He wasn't just a street preacher working out of a $100 a month little office building. He had ministries in several states, and he had figured out a way through business to help people as well as to spread the word of God and the Bible through these ministries, as well as not shying away from the Vatican and the Jesuit-led New World Order and what they're doing today. Now, you can get a lot of his personal experiences on his website at alamoministries.com, even though he's sitting in jail now, and he's been there since 2008, and most of his appeals are exhausted. I still see that the ministry is functioning, even though many people have had to leave because they're frightened that their children will be taken away. More than 35 children have been taken from their parents, basically kidnapped, and little legal technicalities used to keep them away from their parents, many to this day. And even when there was no child abuse charges or child abuse ever found. And we'll get, I've done a number of shows on the kids, and we'll feature that tomorrow, because there's a number of things I still wanted to talk about. And the real reason I'm doing this is to open your mind a little bit. If you go to the media, if you go and you see how this raid was orchestrated, which I'll get into in the second half hour, you will see that there's a double standard going on. Just do some research regarding the child abuse and pedophilia and even murder of young infants throughout the history of the Vatican, even up until this day, and all over the world. And I yet to have seen them, publicize it like this. You don't see any SWAT team raids going on at St. Patrick's High School or other little, grammar schools all over the country where priests have been kind of ushered out quietly when they've been accused, and also many caught red-handed abusing children. It's a double standard. Many of these guys sit in they have their own little halfway house where they supposedly rehabilitate these priests. So a Bible-believing Christian sits in a jail cell, while a priest sits on a halfway house where he can watch TV, gets good food, plays golf, and supposedly is going to be rehabilitated by his own organization. Now, they've put up a number of priests have been prosecuted, but never have I seen, have the children been taken away from their parents. And I would say today that kids are more at risk of child abuse at going to a Catholic school than they are to this day at the Alamo Ministry. And tell me this, just use your head. If they say that Tony Alamo was a threat, now he's in jail, why would they not allow the ministry to continue? Well, they were interested in shutting up this ministry from sending out pamphlets, which they still do. There's over 300,000 hits a week still on their website. And many of them come from foreign countries, and I've read some of the letters and things that tell me that people want to know this stuff. But as we move forward to this one world government, one world order, we see we're being screened, we're being this information is being withheld purposely so that you get a different view of history, you get a different view of what's going on today. And no one will doubt we live in a world of chaos. But anyway, let's look back a little bit at Tony. And in this 3-part show, which I'm going to do today, tomorrow, and Wednesday, you will see. I'm doing it for a reason, because I'm kind of synthesizing a lot of things, and I just wanted to present these 3 shows. I've been asked to do that so that I could present them. Someone wants to make a YouTube on them, and so I'm doing this for that reason as well. And also so that people hear this story, because a lot of times, I've covered this story, and I've covered many stories in this subject with other Christian ministries like this who have been persecuted, and somehow, they just fade away into the darkness, and everybody forgets, and we move on. But I wanted to keep this fresh in your mind, because it's very important that you look at what was being done and how it was done to a Christian ministry to keeping quiet about the Vatican, and how we treat the Roman Catholic Church around the world. So, he'd been talking about this for decades, ever since he became a born-again Christian. And I told you can go to his website to get a lot of his personal stories. And he was a Hollywood record producer before this happened. Born a Jew, became a born-again Christian. And in his own words, he told me he was a hell-raising Hollywood record producer who hobnobbed with the big shots and movie stars until he said he became born again. And he said, a quote I remember when he told me, he said, I was one of the most unlikely people to be chosen to spread the gospel, but after I became born again, while in a Hollywood meeting with lawyers and movie stars, I quit my record promoting business and starting spread the word of God through his ministry. Now, over the years, it's grown by leaps and bounds. I've seen it from, I've traced it back to where it started, and it's grown by leaps and bounds with churches in California, Arkansas, and several other places. And he said he first learned about the Vatican's involvement way back in the 60s, before really anybody was talking about this. Well, maybe JFK did, kind of secret, when he gave his secret society speech, when he basically said that no pope is going to run this country, and basically wouldn't allow Cardinal Spellman, the most powerful man in the city of New York, and the country perhaps, into the White House. And kind of when he backstabbed these people, he had to be killed. And really, Tony said what the Vatican hates most, and why they've attacked him and have attacked him, is someone who preaches the Word of God, who preaches the Word of truth, and who's not afraid to out the Vatican in their secular and their spiritual endeavors, so to speak. And I remember people say, well, why do people like this do that? And I think the answer is, he said he fears God more than he fears the criminals in the Vatican and their evil workers. And when he says criminals in the Vatican, let's say I'm just a simple journalist. And in fact, I grew up a Catholic, and when I went to Rome and spent 7 years there, I saw firsthand how they are criminals. And really what was going on, I happened to be there during the biggest bank scandal they ever had, and so I saw what he was talking about, not knowing him at the time, because this was back in the 80s. But he was doing the same thing back then over here. In fact, he was one of the first to allow Alberto Rivera, the Jesuit priest, who started talking about Jesuit infiltration in all of our Protestant churches, and how they masquerade as Protestant priests, masquerade as Pentecostal, what have you, to basically toe the line, get everyone to toe the Vatican line, this ecumenical movement. And he was one of the first to allow Alberto Rivera to speak at his ministry, and you can go and get a lot of the tapes, because afterwards, I had interviewed his wife, I'd interviewed many people regarding Alberto Rivera and how he was killed for what he did, and that is quite an interesting story. And so, as we moved along during this, looking at this story, and this is before he was finally arrested in the 2008. Prior to that, he'd been cleared on child abuse charges. He'd been cleared. Well, he spent, I believe, 4 years in jail for bogus IRS charges. And I've looked into that, and it's similar to what happened to Tupper Saucy, who spent time in jail. He wrote the book Rulers of Evil, and how they use the IRS. And in fact, basically railroad them into jail, and it's kind of like a warning. You're only going to spend a few years, but if you stop, maybe we'll leave you alone. But both Tupper Saucy and Tony Alamo never stopped, and so they continued to try to frame him. And in the case of Tupper Saucy, he actually found out that the prosecutor was a Jesuit priest, his prosecutor. And in the case of Tony Alamo, hired FBI informants came forward stating that they were asked to frame Tony, and they even gave names of their superiors. And in turn, those guys who left the FBI, of course, their records probably were wiped clean, so that if it ever got, push came to shove in a trial or something, they'd be able not to. They'd say, "Well, hey, we don't even know who this guy is." And that they do many times with CIA assassins, FBI undercover agents, things like that. So when these guys came forward on my show, they talked about how actually he's being framed. And it came right from orders from at that time, governor of Arkansas, William Clinton. And I remember this one FBI agent, John Peeler, said to me on my show, I had to leave the FBI after I couldn't carry out the Alamo assignment. I then went to him and apologized. And he apologized right on my show. I had both of them on my show. This is before Tony was in jail. And John Peeler, I'm sure I could interview him again. And I've talked to him recently, and his story hasn't changed. But after the FBI couldn't find any dirt on him, Peeler said, authorities had to trump up a bogus tax violation, which finally landed him in prison. Okay, and that's way back before. And then before this raid occurred, Peeler was trying to warn Tony that they were really ramping up their investigations, their phony investigations, to put him in jail once and for all, because he never did stop sending out millions of pamphlets and talking about what the Vatican was all about. And I think if he would have stopped after this tax evasion charge, they might have left him alone, maybe. But perhaps they would have, but he didn't. He didn't quit. And he said this in one of his articles. He said that the Vatican, which really is a true cult, this is kind of interesting. They always accuse people. They accused him as well as others, like, other Christian ministries, of being a cult. They always accuse Bible-believing ministries of being a cult, because they are, and they accuse them of being what they really are. And he said they're very close to replacing the U.S. Constitution with canon law, with her one world order, canon laws of death to any heretics. Heretic being anyone that is not doesn't follow the Pope and is Roman Catholic. And so he said today there's a detailed plans given in excerpts from a speech nearly 50 years ago in Australia, and we talked about that on our show, given by an archbishop in Australia, who basically outlined what's going on today. So what I wanted to do was to look a little bit at some of the things he said regarding the Vatican, and also talk about a little bit about, we know that in the Bible, many Bible believers will point to passages in Revelations which out the Vatican clearly by their signs and symbols and by what the Bible does say. And he talks mainly about that. Now, when you look at the Jesuits and their banking system, he talked about that as well. It's amazing how people don't get the idea. I think, when we look at the downfall of our country, we have to look at the Federal Reserve banking system, which isn't federal at all. And it's run by, that happened in 1913. So this is a long, long, drawn-out plan. And he had written articles and talked about many of these things. And it basically, because of the number of followers, they had to put an end to this. And so he tried to say a lot of different things regarding the Vatican, and he paid the price. And I remember talking to him, and I said, if you wouldn't have done this, Tony, if you wouldn't have talked about it, this wouldn't be happening. And he agreed, but he said, I can't stop telling the truth about these people. And he said this, he said, the Vatican is so mysterious, and these are some of his words, that most of the priests, nuns, and members on the lower level of the clergy and people who work on lower levels of federal government agencies don't know that they're part of the world's largest cult, and the narcotics and prostitution, pornography, booze, and the black market, every filthy thing that can be traced right back to the Vatican and their government agencies. He said defectors from this large sect, the Roman cult, have stated that, two-thirds of the Vatican's clergy are guilty of homosexuality, lesbianism, and other crimes. And when you look at this around the world, I mean, go to Ireland, go to other countries as well as ours, and see what's happened. Go to Canada. We've done stories regarding the genocide in the mission schools. And the natives in Canada and America. And he's, in a quote from one of his articles, he said that a former high-ranking Jesuit priest who worked in the Vatican for years and answered only to the Pope reported that when John Paul was a priest in Krakow, Poland, factory workers became angry with the future Pope. It was reported that many of the factory workers wanted to kill him, and they stated that they did not want him to come around anymore. And when he would, they would throw oily rags at him because it was reported that he was molesting their children. And it was also reported that he was a cyanide salesman. So he talked a lot about this, the deceptions of the Vatican and the deceptions of things going on in Rome, and bringing it home to the American people. And he said the Vatican's federal government agencies and their heavyweight news media in concert have made it possible for us to have much joy and abundant rewards in heaven, but not here. And he said that when he's been persecuted and under the investigations he had to do to clear himself, he found that the heavyweight news media and, of course, the government agencies, secretly Vatican-controlled or owned, he found so many connections that he had to continue his quest to tell the truth to people. And he said, he said that, they've accused me of people accuse me, he said, of having Vatican paranoia. And he has said this, did Abraham Lincoln and John F. Kennedy have Vatican paranoia? And all the millions of people today who are being hassled and harassed by the federal and state government agencies, plus those who don't have a job and are hungry and are sitting in jails because they are forced to steal because of hunger, do they all have Vatican paranoia? Because of this expose, he said that the Roman cult will act as if they are being persecuted and will say innocently, why is this happening to us? Knowing that those who are ignorant of things will feel sympathy for her. He says, I have no sympathy for the Vatican. I didn't write the Word of God. I just preach it. God doesn't hate good, only evil. In the Vatican, he said, and these were pretty good words, and there are people all deserve the Academy Award Oscar for the best performance of innocency and piety, and also for makeup and wardrobe design, making her outward appearance that of Snow White. Underneath her snow-white outfit, there are running festering sores and ringworm. On the outside, she smiles sweetly and says, "I love you, brother," but behind her bony back, she hides hands that drip with the blood of martyrs. Here is an example, he says, of how the Vatican always covers herself. When she saw that World War II, another Vatican Inquisition, he says, was being lost, she quickly hid, in one instance, 1,000 Jews, so that after killing 6 million Jews, she could say, "We hid and protected the Jews. We loved the Jews." This is the actual truth of what the Vatican did. Speaking of Academy Awards, he said. Let's check the time. Okay, we're going to take a break. We'll be back in 3 minutes on the Investigative Journal.
Visit crosstheborder.org, CROSS, crosstheborder.org, to get your print, EPUB, or PDF version of the book, The Rapture Will Be Canceled. That's crosstheborder.org.
I know you all want answers, and believe me, so do I, and I'll do my best to get them.
Despite Nicolas Cage's promise to do his best to get left behind rapture answers for us, don't hold your breath. Not everyone believes Left Behind is true prophecy. Some may even regard as conspiratorial the mainstream re-release of the Left Behind movie, with actor Nicolas Cage portraying the main character, as an attempt to further reinforce in the minds of all this perception of false prophecy, in order to condition the masses for the play about to begin. If you want true Bible prophecy answers, get the book, The Rapture Will Be Canceled. The author exposes the Latin rapture origin, the 7-year tribulation deception, true Bible revelation of Daniel's 70 weeks, the abomination of desolation, the restrainer, America in the Revelation, the image of the beast and the mark of the beast, and the truth about God's chosen people, and so much more about Bible prophecy. This book will shatter the Left Behind paradigm of future events. Get the book, The Rapture Will Be Canceled. Visit crosstheborder.org, CROSS, crosstheborder.org, to get your print, EPUB, or PDF version of the book, The Rapture Will Be Canceled. That's crosstheborder.org.
The program you are listening to is 100% sponsored by you, the listener, on this First Amendment Rights Media channel. You will notice that there are few commercials on this radio network. There's a good reason for that. Corporate advertising dollars come with strings that limit program content. So without your help, these programs cannot continue on internet or our several affiliates. If you benefit by the educational law programs, we ask you to give. If you are admonished or nurtured by the Bible and ministry programs, we ask you to give. If some voice a cause that you are passionate about, we ask you to give. If you believe in any of these, we ask you to support them as you would a missionary on a continual basis, as if giving a tithe for missionary radio. These programs are not commercially viable and must be supported by those faithful to the cause of truth. Look for the button to sponsor your favorite programs at our listen and schedule pages on the internet. Then, when you subscribe, we will send you the last quarterly MP3 CD of that program immediately, and continue to do so with each new quarter. We will also give you unlimited archive access to all of our programs. We're asking you to give much less than a tithe, so that you may also send support directly to a particular program host, cause, and anywhere else the Spirit may lead you. Do all to the glory of our God and Creator, for His holy nation, the only kingdom that will last forever. Thank you for listening.
Okay, we're back on the Investigative Journal, and let me continue with some more of Tony Alamo's words regarding the Vatican, which landed him in jail for 175 years. on charges. There's so much evidence that he was framed. It's ridiculous. And, if you'll get a completely different side of the story if you listen to the mainstream media, who, by the way, before this raid occurred in 2008, all of them were alerted, over 150 large media outlets, the big ones too, about this. And they just spread it all across the news channels as if it was a major story. While they'll hide all the pedophilia and all the charges against the Vatican. It's incredible to me. And if you look worldwide, there's no comparison. So I'm going to give you a few of his words here, and then we're going to move to the raid of 2008 through the words of one of the people that experienced it. And that should take us to the end of the show, and maybe have to continue tomorrow. But anyway, he said, speaking, this is Tony's words, of Academy Awards, the Vatican has been long time been in the movie industry. Hollywood, influenced by the power of Roman Catholic lobby, furnished us with films like The Song of Bernadette, Going My Way, and a number of exciting films glorifying the Roman Catholic cult. On the other hand, they pushed movies like Elmer Gantry, showing crooked Protestant evangelists. Do you remember Dragnet on television? The Christian was always pictured with a big Bible, smiling after he had strangled Grandma up in the attic. And always the priests were well-respected, highly paid stars like Bing Crosby and Barry Fitzgerald. You see, we are hit psychologically on many fronts by the Vatican and the leader of the one world church and the one world government. And I may add that in recent times you'll see Angels and Demons, the Dan Brown movies, the Da Vinci Code, all Vatican propaganda films. Now continuing, he says, her role as Snow White, the Vatican is using her own media to promote a 3-hour CBS propaganda extravaganza, whitewashing her clay god, the cult leader. I'm sure the oily rag throwing innocent incident was left out of the script. He says there are many beautiful people in the Roman Catholic cult who are not wealthy. Some are even very poor and who are not seeking high position. Most are very humble. These common people are completely unaware of the wickedness that has been and is being committed by the Roman cult, which they have been told is a church. Because God knows their sincere hearts. He is the God of our earth. He said unto these ignorant people, come out of her, my people. And that's in Revelations 18:4. So let's pray, he says, that they soon will come out of her. And he said a grim reminder to the super boss, the Pope, who runs the Roman house of prostitution and the governments that give her power. And he's perfectly correct when you start looking. Go to Concordat.com. It's a website that lists over 200 concordats with the Vatican, and I follow it all the time. And there are some horrendous... Basically what they do is they get into a legal agreement with the government, and then they get favors, and basically, if you don't think they have a network of spies set up all over the world, forget it. You don't know what this organization's all about. And so he basically said, was talking much, in this regard. And he did say this. He said, and he was right on, he said, the Vatican wants to move from Rome to Jerusalem. On September 26th, way back in even 1973, the Houston Chronicle reported that the politically power-hungry Henry Kissinger helped his supercult, the Vatican, by proposing that Jerusalem become an international city with the control of holy places and the religious administrations being given to the Pope. He mentioned this. The Bible never mentions purgatory or any similar sorts of place, but the Bible does plainly say, quote, it is appointed unto men once to die, but after this is the judgment. And God said, it's either heaven or hell, nothing else. You can't buy your way into heaven, he says Tony, and you can't buy your way out of hell. And nowhere, he says, in the New Testament does it say to kill people who don't believe the way we do. Vatican, however, calls such killing holy wars and justification, and condones it. proving again that she is completely cultish and unscriptural. Now, he was right on. He said that years ago, because look what's going on today with ISIS. I've told you many times, if you go to my shows, what ISIS means. And she's in one of the Egyptian pagan goddesses that is worshipped. They have the, you have the monument, the obelisk in the St. Peter's Square, the obelisk in Washington, the obelisk in London, all worshipping ISIS. And now even the pundits, the generals, are saying we're in a holy war, and then the Vatican comes on and says, no, we're in an unholy war. So what are they doing? And then you read stories where, people are just getting to the tip of the iceberg to understand how they can incite revolution and then even fund it and then create the enemy that we are fighting today. They've done this in the past. Just look back to the American Revolution, the French Revolution, the Russian Revolutions. All this has been done in the past. And so go to the people with the experience, and they're right in Rome. So, the raid takes place, and I wanted to go back to that in the last minute, in the last part of this show, and look at it from the eyes of someone who was in the ministry and what happened. And it starts out like this. September 20th, 2008 started out like any other day, says Ms. Andrasik. It was beautiful, sunny Saturday. The roses were in bloom outside and the birds were singing. School was closed for the weekend, and all the kids were rejoicing in their freedom from studies. The day went blissfully by like any other normal Saturday. People went about their regular work. This all changed abruptly. I was sitting in the sunroom by the sliding glass door so that I could soak in some sunshine while working on my computer. Some children were outside with their parents and friends, taking turns riding the pony and playing with the little cockapoo and little Shih Tzu dogs that we had. And at 6 p.m., I saw something out of the corner of my eye, right outside the sliding glass door. I glanced up and saw a man clothed in black from head to foot, wearing a gas mask and carrying something large, long, with a barrel. At first I thought I didn't know that we had a fumigator coming. I assumed the instrument he was carrying was the tool they use for eliminating pests in houses. Then I realized this was no fumigator for household pests, but rather an exterminator for humans. The man's clothing had the letters FBI boldly branded on them, and the instrument I mistook for a fumigation tool was really a machine gun. I heard the man say, "This is the door they said would be the easiest way in." The front door was unlocked and they could have walked right in, but instead they began prying the sliding glass door off. This all happened within a matter of a few seconds. My heart stopped. I could barely think. Why were these men coming and trying to remove this door? What had we really done? Further, were they going to do it to us? She ran as fast as I could to the room where there was a cell phone. I grabbed it, and I was running to the rear of the house where I knew 3 girls were collating some gospel literature. I tried to call someone. The cell phone was dead. It wasn't turned on. Either way, I couldn't make the call. I was breathless. And she says I was breathless. And I reached, I was breathless when I reached the girls, one of my 16-year-old sisters. But I managed to tell them the FBI were prying the door off of the house. They immediately panicked, not knowing what to expect. In this large room, there were 4 sets of sliding glass doors. As we looked out one of them, we could see the SWAT team had not yet come to this end of the house. I could see them still at the entrance they had made by the dismantling the door. A helicopter hovered right above the house. Now, this picture that I'm painting here through the eyes of Ms. Andrasak is just incredible. I mean, here we have a peaceful Ministry. They know it's peaceful because they had FBI agents who said there's nothing going on there, although they won't admit that. But they got to put on this big show and scare the, what happens if these guys, you folks, the reason I'm telling you this story is it could happen to you. The vibrations it caused were tremendous. We carefully opened the sliding door at the very end. I crept out first and the girls followed me. There was a gate about 10 feet from where we were. We tried to reach it so we could leave the property. We managed to leave the house unseen. The feeling that we were almost to safety surged through every fiber of my being. My fingertips tingled as I touched the latch on the gate. I was hoping that the 2 adults and 4 children who were in the backyard with the animals had already gotten away through the same gate. But alas, when we pushed open the gate, a man on the other side pushed it closed. He told us tauntingly that we were too late and had to go back. He was not letting us out. So, they're prisoners. What have they done? I told you what they've done. They were involved in spreading the truth about the Vatican. Boils down to that. Since we were surrounded, there was nothing left for us to do but go back in the house and try to get on another phone and call for help. We all rushed back in, but inside we were met with agents armed with machine guns. I could see that their lasers were on. I looked down at my chest. There was one of them directly over my heart. Now here we got this guy with a machine gun pointing at a young girl. There was one of them directly over my heart and over the other girls' hearts as well. We were terrified. The men yelled at us to put your hands in the air and don't move. Indeed, if we had moved, I had no doubt one of us would have not been alive today. When they came towards us, I remember seeing the faces of the girls that were with me. They were pale and their eyes were as wide as they could possibly be. All of our hands were trembling. I remember thinking that I had to try to show courage for the other girls. I asked the men, is it really necessary for you to aim those guns at us? We're just young, innocent girls. And they replied, we were told that you all had weapons. So, somebody's feeding them a line of bull. No, I have never seen a gun in my life until now. They said some things, but I was in such a terrified state that I can't remember what. And when you tell these armed guys that this is happening, maybe one of the girls got upset and wanted to go to get a handkerchief out of her pocket and put it, and they could have shot her. Thank God that nothing happened like that, but the situation was ripe for that to happen. Now, they said some things, but I was in such a terrified state that I can't remember what. They did take their aim off of us. They made us follow them upstairs to the aforementioned sunroom where I'd previously been working. The phone in the office was ringing off the hook, but we were not allowed to answer it. I desperately wanted to. By this time, the house was crawling with FBI agents and Arkansas State Police. There had to be at least 100 of them. Do you think that's a bit of an overkill, folks? From this room, we saw that the 2 adult women and 4 girls outside, the youngest being 7 years old, were being brought from the backyard by more agents. After all of us were herded into this sunroom and had been sitting for a while, some social workers came in. They began questioning all of us as to our names and our ages, etc. Why are the social workers there? What the heck is going on here? Don't you think it's an orchestrated effort? Don't you think? And the FBI agents were told lies to begin with. And then they started taking the younger ones off by themselves and interviewing them separately. Yeah, that's a real, they're frightened to death. They got guns pointed at them. And now they're interviewing them, give me a break. Then they started taking the younger ones, they said, off by themselves and interviewing them separately. After what seemed like hours, the social worker suddenly decided to take all the children into custody. All the girls were scared. Their faces were white, and they were crying. They were asking, what is going to happen to us? And my sister clung to me, but social workers took them all and loaded them into a vehicle. But the most tragic scene had not taken place yet. The 7-year-old girl was told to go and get her shoes. Knowing that she was about to be taken away, she instead ran into her mother's arms and told her what was happening. She had wrapped her legs around her mother and locked them in place. She wrapped her arms around her neck and interlaced her fingers. Her mother wrapped her arms around tightly around her daughter. 3 social workers, women, came and surrounded them. "Mommy," the girl shrieked, "don't let them take me." They began trying to pry her little interlocked fingers and legs off. I can't even begin to tell you what this horrific scene looked like. Now, to me, as a former law student, the whole thing has no probable cause to begin with. It's an overkill. You got 100 masked men with machine guns, and now you got these social workers ripping the kid. Now that's an assault right there, assault and battery by these workers. Right at that point, when they laid their hands on these people. But you know what? It's not looked at that way, because the press had already decided that these people were guilty. And it was going to be spread over 150 newspapers. And we live, folks, in a free country, right? Well, no, we don't. We play the game. We wake up thinking we are, because that's what we've heard. Her little face was paler than any face I had ever seen before and since. Her lips were blue from her screaming. The people in the house about 100 feet away said that they could hear her screams all the way over there. The mother was begging and pleading with these women. "Please don't take my daughter. Please don't take her. She has never been away from me in her life. Have mercy, please. I haven't done anything wrong." The little girl was screaming, "I love her. Please let me stay with her. I love her. I want my mommy. Mommy, don't let them take me." And unutterable screams followed. The women became more determined to loosen their grips on each other. One of the male agents, seeing the struggle, came to help the women and take the little girl. Between all of them, they finally loosened the grip of both mother and daughter. They took the little girl, still screaming and crying, out to where the other girls were. The mother came and collapsed in a chair next to me. She was so shocked from what had just happened. Her hands were sweaty, her face was pale, and she was crying, saying, "I don't know what I'm going to do. They took my baby. I feel like I'm going to die." I put my arms around her and tried to comfort her. I didn't know what to tell her. The agent who had finally succeeded in prying the little girl away from her mother was holding her in a kitchen before he passed her on to the female social worker. He was wearing a bulletproof vest. She later told us that she had tried tickling the man in hopes that he would drop her. She said that she didn't want to hit him for fear that he would get angry and do something to her. On the way out to the vehicle the social worker was carrying her to, the little girl grabbed onto anything she could in the house to try to stop herself from being dragged away. I mean, that's basically, what do we got here? It sounds like a brutal kidnapping if you didn't realize, but they're authority figures, so they're doing the right thing, right? Oh, give me a break. I got about 6 minutes here, and I'll try to get as much in as I can, and we'll continue this tomorrow. The agent, okay, so we have this girl being ripped away, and her trying to grab onto anything to stay close to her mother. Now, unbeknown to us, says Ms. Andrasak, one of the women's hearts must have been touched after seeing the tragic scene, because she took the little girl away from the woman who was carrying her out to the vehicle. She began trying to soothe her and ask her if she had ever been away from her mother before. "No, I even sleep in the same bed with her," came the pleading, desperate reply. After a few more questions of this sort, she brought the girl back to her mother. She leaped into her mother's arms. Their tears of joy flowed freely, and they hugged and kissed each other. After this, they went into a bathroom and locked themselves in for a long time. Later, they had to come out, but still they went and hid in another part of the room. During the hours that followed, the agents ordered themselves pizza. We were not given anything to eat or drink. We were treated as if we were not there. Finally, I asked if I could get some things from the kitchen. I was allowed to, so I and another adult woman went and got some apples and crackers. We tried eating, but we could barely get anything to slide down our throats because they were so dry. We huddled together, waiting, praying, and hoping that they wouldn't come back to take the little girl. We prayed that the SWAT team would leave. Now, around 11:30 p.m., when they finally did leave, the house was in shambles. From their wave of terror, they left behind hearts broken and permanently scarred. Our lives had been so horrifically changed from the secure and peaceful way we had once lived. Nothing would ever be the same again. None of the 6 girls who were forcibly taken from loving homes and relatives that fateful day ever returned to their families. Now, this is 3 years later, and all children were forced into public schools. And they're now on drugs. Now remember, those 6 kids, I'm going to add this, were taken that day, never returned to their parents, and I've had their testimonies on my on other shows, which I'm going to go over again in the days to come. And then they put the judge the next day in Arkansas put out basically an APB to find and put into custody all the other children at the other ministries around the country. So the number is soared to about 35. Many, after hearing this, left the ministry with their kids and went to places unknown so they wouldn't have them taken away. And this was their attempt to dismantle this ministry. Now, 3 years later, this report talks about all these children were forced into public schools. They're on drugs, which they were never exposed to before. Some are pregnant. Some have had abortions. And some have been given to homosexuals in adoption. They are permanently scarred, irreparably damaged. May God reward these demons for what they have done. My God, it's crazy. This very well could happen to you. It's happening to literally thousands of people. So prepare yourself for sorrow. Prepare yourself for the kingdom of heaven by saying a prayer. And she says this prayer. And you just completed. She says by doing this, first of all, by understanding this, by realizing what's happened, by looking into this case, you'll get an idea of really what's going on. And without doing this, you'll never really understand it. And so that's why I like bringing this story to you, because it gives you an idea of really what's going on behind the scenes that never gets published, never gets seen. When you hear this radio, you're going to hear a whole completely story, but I hope when you hear it from the eyes of someone that was actually there, really what was going on. I'm going to continue this tomorrow. We're all out of time. Back tomorrow on the Investigative Journal.
Since the beginning of time, kings have sought it, nations have fought for it. It has been traded, it has been borrowed, it has been purchased, it has been stolen. There's a reason for it. To secure the blessings of liberty to ourselves and to our posterity. Invest with the security of gold and silver. Call Discount Gold and Silver Trading at 1-800-375-4188 or visit discountgoldandsilvertrading.net. Listen to Financial Survival with your host Melody Cedarstrom right here on FirstAmendmentRadio.com at 4 p.m. Eastern or 1 p.m. Pacific Time. Visit discountgoldandsilvertrading.net or call Discount Gold and Silver Trading at 1-800-375-4188. Toll free 1-800-375-4188.